You hear this term everywhere, right? The deep state. It gets thrown around as a political buzzword, a conspiracy theory, a rallying cry. But behind all that noise, there's a really important question. Is there a hidden layer of power in America, one that operates beyond the reach of democracy? So let's cut through all the politics and really try to find out.
I mean, you hear it all the time on the campaign trail. It's a call to arms against this shadowy, unseen enemy. This idea of a secret group of unelected people pulling all the strings. And look, this isn't just a catchy phrase. It taps into a very real, very genuine fear about where power truly lies in America. So, that brings us to the big question. Is the deep state actually real? Well, to even begin to answer that, we have to go back in time, way back, to a moment when the line between democracy and secrecy got dangerously, dangerously blurred. So, let's kick things off with a story. It's a story about power, about who you know, and a truly bizarre presidential decision that, on the surface, makes absolutely no sense.
Okay, picture this. It's October 1962. We are at the absolute height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. A U.S. spy plane snaps a photo over Cuba, and when they zoom in, they see it. Launch equipment, trailers, and the most destructive weapons on Earth. The Soviets have put nuclear missiles right in America's backyard. The entire world is holding its breath.
Okay, but this is where the story takes a really weird turn. President Kennedy's advisors are all pushing him to invade Cuba. The pressure is just unimaginable. So what does he do? He gets up and leaves the White House to go to a cocktail party. I mean, it sounds absolutely insane, right? Why would you leave at the most critical moment in modern history?
And that right there tells you everything you need to know. See, JFK didn't go to that party to escape the pressure. He went because that's where the real power was. Not in the Oval Office, but in some house in Georgetown with the people he actually trusted to make the real decisions.
I mean, just look at who was on this guest list. You've got the longest-serving CIA director, a guy who would become CIA director, one of the founding officers of the CIA. Now think about this. These guys were unelected. They were accountable to no one. Yet they had all this secret power. And get this, they all lived within a few blocks of each other. This was a tiny, tight-knit circle of influence, operating completely outside the normal democratic process. So you have to ask yourself, how did we get here? How did this happen? Well, the answer really starts with a war that changed absolutely everything.
You know, for most of American history, spy agencies were strictly temporary things. You'd create one for a war, and you'd shut it down the second peace was declared. Why? Because there was this deep, deep fear that a permanent spy agency would be a threat to freedom itself. But Pearl Harbor changed all of that. Roosevelt created the OSS, an agency that could basically do whatever it took to win. And then, just as planned, when the war ended, it was dissolved.
And President Truman, he was absolutely adamant about this. He had just fought a war against the Nazis, and he was terrified of creating an American Gestapo. He knew exactly what a permanent, secret intelligence agency could turn into, a tool of tyranny.
But, well, the genie was already out of the bottle. Because as soon as World War II ended, the Cold War began. And with this new endless conflict against the Soviet Union, the argument for a permanent spy agency came roaring back. And even though Truman feared a police state, he was eventually convinced that the new threat was just too big to ignore.
And just like that, the Central Intelligence Agency was born. And if you look at its founding mandate, it's so vague. And that was on purpose. It says the CIA will perform other functions and duties related to intelligence affecting national security. Everybody knew exactly what that little phrase meant. It was a license to do whatever they felt was necessary, just as long as they didn't have to write it down.
So what do you think happened? What did the CIA do with this vague mandate and basically a blank check? Well, for the next 2 decades, they went on what can only be described as a global crime spree.
I mean, the list of what the CIA did next is just staggering. They overthrew a democratic government in Iran. They staged a coup in Guatemala for a fruit company. They ran mind control experiments in MKUltra on unsuspecting American citizens, dosing them with LSD. They used journalists to spread propaganda, and they spied on Americans who were protesting the Vietnam War right here at home. This wasn't just foreign policy anymore. This was a shadow government running wild, with zero oversight. So how in the world did they get away with all this? They used the most powerful weapon there is, secrets. There's this one chilling story about the CIA's counterintelligence chief,
James Jesus Angleton. A guy came in for a meeting, and to show him who was boss, Angleton quoted back to him word for word what the man had said to his wife in their own bed the night before. That kind of power, that ability to know anyone's deepest secrets, it's a form of blackmail, and it's exactly what kept Congress too scared to even try and rein them in.
But by the 1970s, things were starting to change. The Vietnam War was a disaster, and public trust in the government just hit rock bottom. People were demanding accountability, and Congress, well, they were finally forced to do something.
So this senator, Frank Church, he led this massive investigation into America's intelligence agencies. And the scale of this thing was just unprecedented. They called 800 witnesses, they reviewed thousands and thousands of secret documents. For the very first time, the curtain was about to be pulled back.
And what they found, it was horrifying, truly. They found out the agency had developed a silent poison dart gun designed to cause a heart attack for assassinations. They uncovered widespread spying on civil rights leaders. And maybe the most shocking thing of all, they found a letter from the FBI to Martin Luther King Jr., basically telling him he should kill himself.
So you have to ask, how did it ever get this bad? And a huge part of the answer is that Congress didn't want to know. They liked having plausible deniability. The CIA director would come in, give them a single budget number for the whole year, and the attitude from Congress was basically, don't tell us what you're doing with it. They wanted all the power without any of the responsibility.
Okay, so after the Church Committee, a bunch of new rules for oversight were put in place. And for a while, it really seemed like maybe, just maybe, democracy had finally gotten control of this secret state. But then, a new crisis hit. And that whole cycle of fear, secrecy, and power, it started all over again.
It's like history was echoing itself. Just like Pearl Harbor led to the OSS, the 9/11 attacks created this new environment where pretty much anything goes. The Patriot Act was passed, and all those same warrantless surveillance techniques the Church Committee had exposed were brought back and expanded on a massive scale. That old Cold War mentality of do whatever it takes? Yeah, it was back with a vengeance.
But for years, most of us had no idea just how big this new secret state had become. Not until 2013. That's when a former intelligence contractor named Edward Snowden blew the whistle on a vast global surveillance system run by the NSA, collecting data on millions of ordinary people. It was history repeating itself, but this time on a massive, digital, global scale.
And all of this, it brings us right to the fundamental conflict at the very heart of this story. This constant, difficult tug of war between our freedom and our desire for security. So, in making that trade-off over and over again, have we accidentally created something the founders never, ever intended? A kind of fourth branch of government, one that's permanent, secret, and operates totally outside the system of checks and balances. A power that's so dug in, so entrenched, that maybe even our elected presidents can't really control it.
In the end, we're left with this powerful warning from Senator Frank Church himself. He said that crisis makes it tempting to ignore the wise restraints that make men free. So the question for us today is still the same. How much of our freedom are we really willing to give up for a feeling of security? And once it's gone, can we ever really get it back? That's the seductive pull of secret power, and it's the dilemma we are still wrestling with today.